guys, today we are continuing my series on the best budget studio monitors, and here I have the Cali Audio LP6s. And if you didn't catch my last video in the series, I reviewed probably the least expensive 6-inch studio monitors that money can buy. So if budget is your number one concern, definitely check out that video first. But I can comfortably say that these are probably the best value in the industry. They come in at just a little more expensive than the last pair I reviewed, but the extra money you pay is well worth the sound quality that you get. So if you want to learn more about these Cali Audio LP6 home studio monitors, stick around. I'm Dan, this is Guns and Guitars, and let's get started. Now, these Cali Audio LP6s were highly recommended from you guys for me to check out and review. And I'm really glad that you did, and this is proof that I read your guys' comments and I try really hard to get my hands on the gear that you want to see me review. And in my quest to find the best budget studio monitors, these have to come in at really close to the top of the list, if not the top of the list, because they only run about $199 a piece. So you're looking at $398 for a pair. And so, just under $400, if you recall, the Speak Friend studio monitors that I reviewed last time came in at just under $300 for the pair, which is a great deal, a great bargain. But for that extra $100 for a pair, you get a heck of a lot more sound with the LP6s. Now, these are still a 6.5-inch driver, just like the Speak Friend studio monitors, so I think this is a very fair comparison. When I first unboxed these, and bumped up the jams, the first thing that I noticed is that these things get really stinking loud. In fact, I couldn't bump them to full volume inside my motorhome because it was making all of our ears hurt. So I actually had to take them outside to crank them up to full volume, and I actually found that cranking them to full volume, I couldn't get the speakers to peak or distort or clip or anything. So that tells you that they have not only really high quality speakers, but a really high quality amplifier that is tuned specifically for these speakers, because like I said, I couldn't get a single bit of clipping or distortion out of them whatsoever. So, and that's really how you get a really good sounding speaker. Most speakers are underpowered, and these definitely are not underpowered. They have all the power they need to just really sing. Now, that being said, having the loudest set of speakers is not necessarily ideal for the home studio, and these are definitely geared towards the home studio musician. You won't find a pair of $400 speakers in a high-end recording studio. So they definitely tailored these to the home studio musician in a lot of ways. And it was actually, most of the ways are actually very thoughtful. So we're gonna get into that in a little bit. But one thing that I did notice is the louder that you cranked it, there's a high-mid frequency that gets more and more obnoxious the louder that it gets. Now, it's something that when I was listening at a moderate or a lower level that I didn't necessarily notice, but once I cranked it, I noticed it. And so I looked at the frequency response graph, and sure enough, there's a little bump right around 1K in that upper mid section. Now, 1K is a beautiful frequency when it's used correctly, but if it's not used correctly, it can be extremely obnoxious. And I think that's the case with these monitors. When you bump them to a really high volume, that obnoxiousness comes out. Now, again, like I said, if you're listening at a lower or a moderate level, like you will be in a typical home studio environment, it's not an issue, but just know that it's there. Continuing with the tone profile, these speakers have really excellent clarity in the low end. A little too clear, if I'm being honest. Now, for a set of reference monitors, you guys know, you really want a really neutral tone profile, right? You want the most even frequency response across the entire spectrum. That way you can find the less good sounding frequencies and make sure that you cut them out of your mix, right? And that's why you can't do that on a set of Bose speakers, because Bose speakers, they've already tuned out those yucky, obnoxious frequencies, and they've only left like the ear candy frequencies. So you can't mix and master on a set of Bose speakers. Now, that's one thing that I need to warn you about these. And again, one of the reasons why they're definitely marketed towards the home studio musician as opposed to high-end studios is because, like I said, the low end has tons of clarity, and that's because they've kind of scooped out a little bit of the lows right in those muddy frequencies. And again, this is something that was confirmed when I looked at the frequency response graph. There's a little dip between 80 and 120 hertz, okay? That's definitely known to be kind of the mud zone. And you just need to be super conscious of that, especially if you're a bass player like me. Those are frequencies you need to be very careful how you use. Now that being said, it makes for some really good sounding speakers. I mean, listening to music on these is a pure pleasure with just that little tiny scoop out in those lows, and then it comes right back up around the 60 hertz range, which again, if you're a bass head, you know that that is just a beautiful frequency, and then it starts tapering off after that. So if you are going to be doing some serious studio recording with these, one, you need to remember that you are missing just a little bit in those lows, and two, you're going to need to add a subwoofer to these, because these do taper off after 60 hertz. So those deep bass drops and 808s and stuff, you can sort of hear them, especially at lower listening levels where the frequency response is a little more flat and neutral. But especially once you crank it up higher, the bass kind of starts to disappear. So just keep that in mind. Again, these are beautiful for listening to music, and that's the reason why I feel like they are geared towards the home studio musician, because the average home studio musician will buy a set of studio monitors, and then around 80 to 90% of the time, they're actually just listening to music. They're not actually recording and engineering and mixing and mastering. Now, there are exceptions. I do have one friend who uses his studio monitors probably opposite 90% of the time for mixing and mastering, and only 10% of the time listening to reference mixes. But for the rest of us, and myself included, I find that my home studio speakers spend most of their time just playing music for me to listen to, more so than actual recording, engineering, mixing, and mastering. So if that's the case, you definitely want a speaker that can do both things really well, okay? You don't want speakers that are just so flat and so neutral that they're almost anemic, okay? I had a pair of Yamaha studio monitors that was the case. I mean, they were so neutral, I pretty much didn't enjoy listening to music on them. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, I've had a pair of both M Audio and Rocket studio monitors who make speakers that are so colored. Let's be honest, they sell a lot more speakers in Guitar Center when you're A-Bing them, you know, between the higher end Dyne Audio and even Yamaha, like I said, super anemic. And then you listen to some Rockets or some M Audios and you're like, yeah, the music sounds better. Well, that's what I was talking about earlier with Bose speakers, okay? They're tuning them to kind of trick your ears. And so you just want to be conscious of that. You want a speaker that does both well, not something that's just going to make all of your music sound great, but something that will give you a neutral reference. And that's where I feel like these speakers just really sing, okay? They do have a very neutral frequency response graph, and so I'll go ahead and throw that on here. Look at this graph! But I want you guys to know something, and that was my biggest criticism, I think, about my last studio monitor video, is that there was no published frequency response graph for those SpeakFriends studio monitors. And that's because they had a built-in EQ. And with a built-in EQ, you just can't really publish a frequency response chart, because the moment you start playing with the EQ, it all changes. So when you guys are looking at a frequency response graph, you need to keep in mind the size of the room that it's going in, how far away the speaker is from the back wall, how far away it is from the front wall, how far away it is from your ears, the direction that it's pointing, is it mounted up high on the wall, is it mounted down low on your studio desk? All these things affect how your speakers are going to sound. So looking at a frequency response chart that's been recorded in absolute ideal circumstances is not necessarily going to apply to you in your home studio. They are great for confirming what you're hearing with your ears, but definitely put more emphasis on what you're hearing over the frequency response graph. Which brings me to the next thing that I really love about these speakers, okay? If you turn them around, you'll see that on the back here, there is a number of dip switches, okay? And you can use those dip switches to tune these speakers to your setup, okay? There's a low-end boost and cut, a high-end boost and cut, and in addition to that, you can see all these different settings for how you're setting up your speakers. Again, if they are mounted on the wall, if they are going to be sitting on your studio desk, if they're going to be greater than a half meter from the wall behind it, or less than a half meter from the wall behind it, and how far it is from you, etc. They've got different settings. This all is extremely thoughtful for the home studio musician, okay? Because when you're buying high-end speakers, they come with instructions of how you're supposed to set them up in your studio, and you build your studio around your speakers because you want your room to sound the best that it possibly can and give those speakers the best opportunity that they have to reproduce the sound that you're trying to record. With your home studio, it's not the case. You're just turning your bedroom into a studio, right? So I think it's very thoughtful that they have that in mind with these speakers, the ability for you to tune them to your room instead of building your room around your speakers. Now, next thing that I love about these speakers as a personal home studio use is that, again, they were very thoughtful with your setup. Okay, not everyone in a home studio has really high-end audio interfaces to drive these speakers. So, again, looking at the back, they not only have the standard XLR and TRS inputs, they also put in an RCA input as well. So if you just wanted to go RC8 out of your computer's sound card and straight into your speakers, you have that option, which is great. I mean, I've had times where I've had to go through converters that can convert my little headphone output jack out to, a balanced, XLR or TRS jack. But the fact that they put RCA straight on here, super cool. Now, Cali Audio also sent me this little device right here, and this thing is super cool. This thing is a Bluetooth input module. So it has your XLR and 1/4 inch TRS outputs on it, but you can connect to this thing via Bluetooth with your smartphone so that you can listen to your reference mixes via Bluetooth, which is awesome. And also on the side of it, it has a 3.5 millimeter input, okay? Now this is really awesome and really good news for us home studio musicians. You don't need a really high-end interface that has XLR and 1/4 inch outputs on it for your studio monitors. You can just take the 3.5 millimeter headphone jack out of your computer, stick it into there, and then come out of this into your speaker via XLR or TRS. And then you can use your iPhone or, Apple Watch to listen to your reference mixes as you, walk around your house or whatever, and you can control it, via your phone or your watch. And it's just really awesome. It's really thoughtful. And you guys know that the Bluetooth feature on the SpeakFriend studio monitors was something that I really liked and I wish more studio monitors would do. And so I think it's cool that Cali, while they didn't build that feature into these studio monitors, and this is a module that you do need to pay extra to have, but it's cool to have the option. And this thing will work with any studio monitor. So if you already have a set of studio monitors, you might want to pick up one of these things if you want to be able to listen to your reference mixes from a Bluetooth device. And again, that's something that us home studio musicians would really appreciate, because like I said, most of us use our speakers 90% of the time just for listening to music and not necessarily for recording and engineering. Now, obviously, if you do have a high-end interface and you think what I'm talking about is absolutely heresy, you can hook these up the way you normally would with, if you use the outputs on your interface, you can get that 0 latency monitoring and all that. But for the average recording musician, especially the ones that are looking at a budget set of studio monitors, this thing's really cool and very handy. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about with these speakers is the durability. And this is something that most of you probably aren't going to care about, because most of you are going to buy a set of studio monitors, you're going to stick them on your bookshelf and call it a day, right? Now, these things have been traveling with me on the road for nearly a year now. If you guys don't know, a little over a year ago, my family and we decided to sell everything that we own, buy an RV, and just hit the road. And so I do all my videos out of my motorhome. And I've had these for nearly a year. I got them last November, and they've traveled with me across the country and back. And they have held up super well. Now, if your home isn't a rolling earthquake like mine, again, this is something you don't really need to worry about unless, you're worried about your studio being childproof or whatever. But these things have bounced around in a fifth wheel travel trailer and a motorhome for the better part of a year, and I've never had any issues with them falling apart. And as you can see, they have gotten bumped and scratched and nicked, and I think the only thing cosmetically that happened is down here at the bottom corners, again, probably from sliding around as I'm driving around. This fabric, it's not Tolex, some kind of vinyl fabric they paste over what I'm assuming is MDF wood. It's kind of starting to wrinkle down towards the bottom corners on both speakers. Now again, most of you don't need to be concerned about that stuff. In really no one needs to be concerned because it's purely cosmetic. As far as the internals, the electronics, these things are solid. They sound just as good as the day I bought them. Actually, they sound a little bit better because speakers typically need a break-in period. So the more that I've used them, actually the better that they've sounded. Now I gotta be honest with you guys, the reason why I've held on to these for so long before making the video isn't because I wanted to test the durability. It's because I knew as soon as I reviewed these that my wife was gonna make me get rid of them because they take up too much space in the motorhome. So I'm very sad to see these go, but you know, maybe I'll get another pair to review coming up. But these speakers have been absolutely awesome. I've used them for just about every recording that you've heard on my channel in the last year, not to mention just listening to some music, and they're awesome. But they are a bit big and a bit bulky to carry around in a motorhome everywhere you go. So I understand I need to get rid of them, but it does make me really sad because these really are awesome, especially for the price. I can't believe how awesome they are. So as long as you keep those things in mind, you know, the louder you push it, it's got that high mid frequency that's a little bit obnoxious, and it's got that scoop out in the low end that kind of tends to muddy up mixes. If you guys know that those are there, or you have another set of speakers or some in-ear monitors that compensate for that so that you are just aware of it when you're mixing and mastering, these are gonna serve you really well in your standard home studio environment, especially if you pair them with a sub. Now, I don't know if there's a best budget studio monitor that won't require an additional subwoofer, but if there is, I'm gonna try to find it. I think we're gonna have to step up to at least an 8-inch speaker probably to find a good studio monitor that does not require a subwoofer to hit those really low bass drops and 808s and stuff. So I'll be looking out. I might try the Cali Audio LP8 if they're interested in sending me a pair, although my wife's not gonna be happy because they're gonna be bigger and bulkier and heavier. So if you've got any more suggestions for my list of the best budget studio monitors in this series, be sure to let me know in the comments because these were a really good recommendation from you guys. So definitely trust you guys, and I would love to get my hands on and review whatever you guys feel like I should review next. So until next time, I'm Dan, this is Guns and Guitars. Don't forget to check out my previous video in this series or this playlist over here on the best budget in-ear monitors. They come in a lot cheaper than these. And I will see you in the next video.